Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary's breach of ethics rules is not in isolation the downfall of a government, but it is telling. It speaks to something corrosive within the way Britain treats culture and those charged with guarding it. The Culture Secretary failed to declare that the man she appointed as chair of the new independent football regulator had once donated to her leadership campaign. The Commissioner for Public Appointments found that this omission broke the integrity section of the code, not deliberately but through neglect. Now, an honest mistake is not a hanging offence, but it is the pattern that matters. When a minister responsible for a sector worth billions cannot meet the most basic standards of probity, it becomes clear how undervalued that sector has become in Whitehall. The cultural and sporting life of Britain is treated as decoration, not as a pillar of the national economy and imagination. Consider this. The UK's creative industries, from film and theatre to design, gaming and television, generate around 124 billion a year. Add sport, broadcasting and heritage and the figure rises higher still. Although these activities represent roughly they represent roughly 6% of national income, employing more than 2 million people. 6%. That's larger than agriculture, larger than energy. It's not an indulgence, it's an industry, a national asset, a great international calling card. It is noticeable. Yet the office meant to represent it has been a revolving door of mediocrity for years and years and years. Matt Hancock, Nadine Dorries. Ministers come and go like guests at an after-party, each leaving behind little more than a press release and a photo opportunity. The department responsible for our theatres, our football, our heritage, our artists, our broadcasters is too often treated as the place one sends bright young MPs to learn the rules or older ones to be quietly forgotten. What has been lost in this game of musical chairs is seriousness. Seriousness about the governance of football, about the funding of the arts, about cultural policy, about television as an instrument of national identity and cohesion. Nandy's case is symbolic. She appointed David Cogan, a respected media executive but also a Labour donor. It should have been a simple matter to check whether any personal connection existed. Her failure to do so led to an official finding of 3 breaches of the code. She didn't verify the donation, she didn't raise it at interview, and her department didn't properly disclose his political links, nor did he. The Commissioner was clear. Even the perception of a conflict of interest erodes trust. In politics, perception is reality. The Prime Minister accepted her apology and declared that she'd acted in good faith. Perhaps she did, but good faith is not a substitute for good governance. And the British public has every right to expect that appointments are made with scrupulous transparency, particularly in a sector where politics, money and emotion intersect as tightly as football. If the new regulator begins its life tainted by the smell of cronyism, it will struggle for legitimacy from the start. And there's a deeper irony here. This new football regulator exists precisely because self-regulation in the sport failed, because of the European Super League fiasco, reckless ownerships and financial scandals that left fans feeling excluded from the game they love. The regulator was meant to restore trust, to show that government could act in the public interest. Instead, it begins under a cloud of political impropriety. So we must ask ourselves how this came to be. Partly it's the exhaustion of a political class that no longer seems to value culture as an end in itself. Culture is not simply entertainment, it's how a nation speaks for itself, how it projects its image abroad, how it understands belonging, from Shakespeare's Globe to the Premier League, from the proms to Peaky Blinders. This is Britain's living brand. Yet the stewardship of that inheritance has been left to chance, or worse, to error or nitwits. The arts and sports are not luxuries to be indulged after the serious business of government is over. They are among the few things that still bind us together. They build communities, they regenerate cities, they generate revenue, they export influence. They are the things that can build bridges. A strong cultural policy is as strategic as any industrial plan. But you would never know it from the way our politics behaves at home. We've had ministers for culture who seem barely to attend a play or to know what a match is. We've had periods without any coherent leadership in the department at all. And now, when we finally have a Secretary of State with an opportunity to lead on football reform, she's instead led the sector into embarrassment. It's not that Lisa Nandy is uniquely culpable. It is that she is typical of a political system that regards the cultural brief as soft, minor and decorative. The result is chronic undergovernance. Theatres close, festivals shrink, museums cut staff, sports bodies lose direction, and football, our greatest mass spectacle, needs regulation because its internal ethics collapsed. It seems as if the culture ministry is simply there as some sort of liminal operation that moves things onto Ofcom. What would competence look like? It would begin with a minister who actually understands the world of culture, who sees the arts are not an adjunct to the economy but one of its engines, and that football is not merely sport but an industry and a social institution. It would mean appointments made beyond suspicion, funding that recognises the value of creativity, and politics that sees culture not as an ornament but as infrastructure. Lisa Nandy's breach is a small thing on paper, a forgotten donation, a missed declaration, but symbolically it is vast. It tells us that even now, even under a government that claims to restore integrity, the creative heart of Britain remains administratively neglected. A country that exports Shakespeare and the Beatles, that stages the world's most watched football league and some of its finest theatre, makes the greatest films, deserves more than perfunctory oversight and polite apologies. When culture produces 6% of national income and much of our soft power, it deserves to be treated as a serious business. Until we have a minister who understands that, the scandals will continue, the opportunities will be missed, and Britain will go on squandering one of its greatest strengths, its capacity to create, to inspire, to play.